Imagine you're a woman who often finds herself thinking, if only I knew what he was really feeling. Picture the confusion, the sleepless nights spent wondering why he suddenly became distant, or why his words didn't match his actions. Think back to that moment when you sensed something was off, but couldn't quite pinpoint what. That subtle shift in his energy. The way his eyes no longer lingered on yours. How his touch became mechanical rather than passionate. In those moments, you felt it in your body before your mind could process it, didn't you? What if I told you that men are constantly communicating with you, even when they're not speaking? What if the answers you've been searching for were right in front of you all along, hidden in plain sight? Today, we'll explore the silent language men speak, a language of subtle gestures, unconscious behaviors, and energetic shifts that reveal what's truly happening beneath the surface of their carefully constructed facades. Carl Jung once said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate." This profound insight applies perfectly to our relationships. When we don't understand the unconscious signals exchanged between two people, we remain victims of patterns that seem beyond our control. In Jungian psychology, there's a concept called the shadow, the parts of ourselves we suppress or deny. When a man falls in love, what often attracts him isn't just you, but what you awaken within him. Sometimes his shadow, sometimes his anima, his inner feminine. This creates a fascinating paradox. The very behaviors you think will make him fall more deeply in love might actually be pushing him away. Why? Because your conscious efforts to be what he wants can block the authentic connection his soul is truly seeking. Men, like women, have been conditioned by society to hide their vulnerabilities. They're taught that showing certain emotions makes them weak, that asking for help diminishes their masculinity. So, they develop a complex system of nonverbal communication, signals that allow them to express what they can't put into words. Have you ever noticed how a man's body often contradicts what comes out of his mouth? This isn't necessarily deceit. It's his unconscious mind expressing his truth while his conscious mind says what he thinks he should say. When he says, "I'm fine," but his shoulders are tense, when he insists, "Nothing's wrong," but can't maintain eye contact, his body is sending signals his words are trying to mask. Helena, a woman in our community, shared how her partner would physically lean away during conversations about the future. While he verbally agreed with her plans, his body literally oriented toward the exit. 6 months later, he ended the relationship, explaining he'd felt trapped for a long time. His body knew before he could admit it to himself, or to her. Men are raised in a culture that values competence over vulnerability, strength over emotional expression. From an early age, they learn that showing confusion, fear, or uncertainty can result in lost status or respect. So, they develop the habit of protecting their vulnerabilities, sometimes even from themselves. When a man struggles with emotions he doesn't know how to process, his body often carries the truth his words can't. The tension in his jaw reveals anger he was taught to suppress. The distant gaze signals emotional overwhelm he doesn't know how to express. Fidgeting hands betray anxiety he's trying to hide. And beneath these physical manifestations often lies a deep longing. The desire to be seen, to be understood without judgment, to find a way through emotional complexities his upbringing left him ill-equipped to handle. As a woman, you have a unique ability to perceive these subtle signals. Not because you're naturally more intuitive, but because you've likely had more freedom to develop your emotional capacities. You can notice what he can't say, but this awareness comes with great responsibility. Here's a counterintuitive truth that could change everything. When a man creates distance, it doesn't always mean he's pulling away. Sometimes distance is his way of protecting the connection. Think about it. Men are raised to be problem solvers. When they feel overwhelmed by emotion, they often withdraw to process, to find clarity, to ensure they don't say or do something that could harm the relationship. This retreat isn't abandonment, it's a form of care. The paradox is that when you chase this distance, when you demand closeness the moment he needs space, you create the very dynamic you fear. Your pursuit confirms his unconscious belief that his emotions are too much for others to handle, that he can't be authentic without consequences. Marina had been dating Carlos for nearly a year when she noticed a pattern. After moments of deep emotional intimacy, he'd become distant for a few days. At first, she interpreted this as rejection and reacted by trying to get closer, calling constantly, seeking reassurance. But the more she pushed for connection, the further he withdrew. Frustrated and confused, Marina shared this in our group. Through discussion, she began considering another perspective. What if Carlos's distance wasn't rejection, but a legitimate need to integrate the intimacy they'd shared? She decided to try a different approach. The next time he withdrew after a deeply connected night, instead of chasing him or expressing insecurity, she sent a simple message. "Thanks for the wonderful night. I'll be here when you're back." Then she turned to her own life, projects she'd neglected, friendships that needed attention, that painting class she'd always wanted to take. 3 days later, Carlos reached out, more present and connected than ever. When she gently asked about his distance, he explained something he'd never been able to articulate before. "Sometimes when we get too close, I feel overwhelmed. Not because I don't want the intimacy, but because I'm still learning how to hold it. When you give me space to process, I always want to come back." This is the heart of the masculine distance paradox. Sometimes a man needs to step away so he can step closer. What looks like retreat may actually be preparation for deeper connection. But you might wonder, how do you tell healthy withdrawal from genuine disinterest? When should you give space, and when should you have that hard conversation? The answer lies not just in the pattern of withdrawal, but in what happens when he returns. The man who's processing, integrating, and growing will come back with greater presence, with a renewed desire for connection. The man who's simply pulling away will keep creating more distance, without the movement back toward intimacy. Pay close attention to the questions a man asks you. They reveal what he values, what he fears, and what he hopes for in your relationship. When he asks about your day, is he genuinely curious about the details, or just doing what he thinks a good partner should do? When he inquires about your friends or family, does he remember details from past conversations? A man who repeatedly asks about your past relationships may be carrying insecurities he can't express directly. A man who asks about your dreams isn't just making conversation. He's trying to see if there's room for him in your future. Fernanda noticed something interesting about her boyfriend Pedro. While he rarely spoke about his own feelings or worries, he asked very specific questions about her experiences. At first, she took this as genuine interest, but over time she spotted a pattern. He'd ask how she handled disappointments, how she moved on from past relationships, how she found strength in tough times. One day, after one of these conversations, she gently asked, "Pedro, you always want to know how I face challenges, but you rarely share your own with me. I'm curious about that." After a long silence, he admitted something he'd never told anyone. He was struggling with deep anxiety about his career future, but didn't know how to voice his concerns or even admit his insecurities. Through the questions he asked her, he was secretly searching for strategies, trying to learn how someone else might face the fears and doubts he couldn't articulate. A man's questions often function as an indirect mirror of his inner world. When he asks how you dealt with rejection, he may be processing his own fears of being rejected. When he questions your ambitions, he may be reflecting on his own professional doubts. This is a form of indirect intimacy, a way to explore emotional territories he doesn't feel comfortable navigating directly. Recognizing this pattern lets you respond not just to the surface question, but to the deeper need behind it. An important note: when a man constantly asks about the same topic, especially if his questions carry an interrogative or even accusatory tone, it may reveal a deep insecurity that needs addressing. For example, the partner who repeatedly questions your male friendships, checking details or looking for inconsistencies, isn't just curious. He's expressing an unspoken fear of loss or betrayal. In these situations, answering only the surface question won't resolve the underlying unease. A more effective approach is to acknowledge the unspoken fear. "I notice you ask a lot about my friend João. I'm curious if something about our friendship worries you." Perhaps the most misunderstood signal is silence. In a culture that prizes constant communication, silence feels uncomfortable, even threatening. But for many men, silence isn't emptiness. It's full of processing, feeling, and connection. When a man grows quiet after you've shared something vulnerable, he may not be disinterested. On the contrary, he may be giving your words the weight they deserve, letting them fully land before responding. Similarly, when he sits in comfortable silence with you, not reaching for his phone, not filling the air with nervous chatter, he's demonstrating one of the deepest forms of trust. He's showing he doesn't need to perform or impress. He can simply be. Modern society rarely honors the power of silence. We're bombarded with stimuli, notifications, and pressure to react immediately. This culture of instant response especially disadvantages men, whose emotional communication often requires time and space to fully unfold. Luisa learned this profoundly with her longtime partner, Andre. Early in their relationship, she interpreted his long silences as disconnection, or worse, as silent judgment of her shared vulnerabilities. When she expressed insecurities or fears, his lack of immediate response left her anxious. "Aren't you going to say anything?" she'd ask, her voice tense. Over time, however, she began noticing something. While Andre rarely responded immediately to her deeper disclosures, he often returned to the topic hours or even days later with surprisingly thoughtful insights. Once, after she shared a painful childhood rejection, he stayed silent. She felt the familiar sting of exposed vulnerability without reciprocity. But 3 days later, while walking together, he said, "I've been thinking about what you told me about your childhood. I see how that experience shaped your tendency to anticipate rejection in relationships. I notice it happening sometimes between us." It was a revelation for Luisa. His silence wasn't absence, but an active process of contemplation and integration. Where she processed emotional experiences through immediate verbal expression, he needed time to let emotions settle, to find words that did justice to the depth of what he felt. This difference in emotional processing represents one of the greatest opportunities for misunderstanding in heterosexual relationships. Many women interpret silence as dismissal, when often it's the opposite, a silent honoring of what was shared. This recognition transformed their relationship. Luisa learned to see Andre's silence not as a void to fill or a sign of disinterest, but as a different form of intimacy. She began appreciating the quality of his attention during these silent moments. How he'd look at her with complete presence, how his body remained oriented toward her, even when words were absent. Andre, in turn, learned to signal his process. "I need to sit with this. It's not that I don't care. It's too important for an immediate response." Pay close attention to inconsistencies in his behavior, not to catch him in a lie, but to understand what's happening beneath the surface. When a typically attentive man suddenly becomes forgetful, when an usually affectionate partner grows physically distant, these shifts are meaningful data. They indicate inner conflict, stress, or a change in how he's experiencing the relationship. Instead of taking these inconsistencies personally or dismissing them as character flaws, see them as invitations to deeper understanding. Each inconsistency is a door that, when opened gently, can lead to greater intimacy. Claudia was confused. Her boyfriend, Ricardo, always punctual and reliable, began canceling plans last minute, forgetting commitments, seeming distant during conversations. Her first instinct was to assume the worst. He was losing interest. He'd met someone else. He was reconsidering their relationship. When she voiced these concerns, Ricardo seemed surprised, even a little hurt. "I'm just busy with work, that's all," he insisted, but the answer felt insufficient to explain his dramatic behavioral shift. Rather than keep pressing or accept the surface explanation, Claudia decided to observe the pattern more deeply. She noticed the inconsistencies began around the same time Ricardo took on a new project at work. She also saw he seemed particularly distant after calls or emails related to this project. One evening, when he seemed more relaxed, she approached the situation differently. Instead of asking why he was being inconsistent or expressing her insecurities, she said, "I've noticed you seem especially stressed after communications about the new project. I'm curious about the challenges you're facing." With this approach, the door opened.
confessed he'd been assigned to lead a team for the first time and was struggling intensely with self-doubt. "I'm pretending I know what I'm doing, but the truth is, I'm terrified of letting everyone down," he admitted. "And the worst part is, I can't show it at work. I have to look confident all the time." Ricardo's behavioral inconsistencies weren't about their relationship. They were the result of a man trying to balance an external facade of competence with an internal storm of doubt. Their relationship had become the only space where he could drop the act, but paradoxically, he didn't know how to explicitly communicate this vulnerability.
This is a common pattern. When men face significant pressure in one area of life, they often grow inconsistent in others. Not because they value those areas less, but because their capacity to maintain multiple facades is overwhelmed. The beauty of recognizing this pattern is that it allows for deeper, more compassionate understanding. Instead of interpreting inconsistencies as signs of disinterest or character flaws, you can see them as indicators of a man trying to navigate vulnerabilities he was never taught to express directly. Now we arrive at the deepest layer of these silent signals. Beyond day-to-day communications, beyond expressions of immediate emotional states, there's a more profound signal many men send over the course of a relationship. The unconscious request for you to help him grow. In Jungian terms, men often project their anima, their inner feminine, onto the women they love. This means that on some unconscious level, they're drawn to you because you embody qualities they need to develop within themselves, perhaps emotional intelligence, intuition, relational wisdom, or nurturing capacity. This creates an opportunity for profound partnership, one where each supports the other's wholeness. But it also creates a potential trap, where you take responsibility for aspects of his emotional life that only he can truly develop. The art lies in discerning when to respond to his unspoken needs and when to lovingly hold space for his own growth process, when to nurture and when to challenge, when to step in and when to step back. This discernment doesn't come from books or theories, but from your deep presence, your self-connection, and your commitment to seeing him not as you wish he were, not as you fear he might be, but as he actually is in each moment. Roberto grew up in a family where men rarely expressed tenderness or vulnerability. As an adult, he developed a competent, dependable personality, but something was missing. When he met Julia, he was immediately drawn to her compassionate nature, her ability to form deep connections, her ease in expressing affection. Early in their relationship, Roberto often felt uncomfortable when Julia expressed emotional vulnerability or asked for greater intimacy. He admired these qualities in her but felt inadequate, unsure how to respond authentically. Julia could have interpreted his hesitation as resistance to connection. Instead, she intuited something deeper at play. Roberto wasn't rejecting intimacy. He longed for it but didn't know how to navigate these uncharted waters. Rather than taking responsibility for his emotional life or criticizing his limitations, Julia created a safe space where Roberto could gradually explore these undeveloped parts of himself. She recognized moments of openness and met them with acceptance, not expectations of linear progress. Sometimes, this meant simply being silently present as he struggled to articulate feelings. Other times, it meant modeling through her own actions how to navigate emotional territory. Over time, Roberto began developing his own capacities for emotional intimacy, not by becoming like Julia, but by discovering his own expression of qualities he'd initially only recognized in her. He learned to articulate feelings he'd previously only been able to demonstrate through actions. He learned to stay present during difficult conversations rather than withdraw. This is the true gift of deep relationship. We don't become like the other, but through love, we discover and integrate lost parts of ourselves we could initially only see reflected in our partner. This kind of evolution can't be forced or rushed. It happens through the safety of acceptance, not the pressure of expectation. As a woman in relationship with a man, you have the opportunity not to mold your partner into what you want, but to create space where he can discover for himself the qualities that first drew him to you. As we near the end of our exploration, I invite you to reflect on your own relationship. What silent signals have you been missing? What communications have been happening right before your eyes that you haven't been able to see? Perhaps there's a behavioral pattern you've been interpreting through the lens of your fears, when a different interpretation could reveal a more empowering truth. Perhaps there are signals you've been ignoring because acknowledging them would require a difficult choice or uncomfortable conversation. Remember, awareness alone is transformative. Simply by becoming conscious of these dynamics, you change them. When you bring light to the unconscious patterns in your relationship, you create the possibility for new choices, deeper connection, and more authentic love. I'd love to hear about your experiences. Have you noticed silent signals that revealed important truths about your relationship? How did recognizing these signals change your connection? Share your stories in the comments below, and let's learn from each other's wisdom. Because ultimately, this journey is about becoming fluent in the language of authentic connection. Learning to read not just the words that are spoken, but the truth that lives in the spaces between them. In this deeper reading lies the possibility of a love that sees and is seen, that honors both spoken and unspoken truths, that embraces the full complexity of what it means to be human together. The ability to read his silent signals isn't about gaining power or control in your relationship. It's not about cracking some secret code to gain an upper hand. Rather, it's about developing the capacity to see beyond the surface, to witness the humanity in the person you love, including the parts he struggles to express. It's about creating a relationship where both of you can be more fully yourselves, more honestly connected, more deeply known. This kind of seeing is perhaps the greatest gift we can offer another person. The gift of being witnessed in our wholeness, both our spoken and unspoken truths. Thank you for joining me in this exploration. Until next time, may you see and be seen in the fullness of who you are.